Grandma often said that the saddest sound in the world was not crying. It was silence. Because crying means pain has a voice. Silence means pain has learned to live alone. When she was a little girl, silence was taught to her very early. She was born in a small house with cracked walls and a loud family. There were many people, many rules, and very little space to be herself. Her name was Margaret, but no one really used it. She was called the girl, the daughter, or simply her. From the day she learned to walk, she also learned something else: how to stay out of the way. Her brothers were allowed to speak loudly. They laughed, argued, ran freely. When they made mistakes, people smiled and said, "Boys will be boys." But when Margaret made a mistake, the room went quiet. "Be careful. Sit properly. Don't talk too much." Those sentences followed her everywhere. Still, inside her small heart, something beautiful lived. Dreams. At night, when everyone slept, Margaret would lie on her thin mattress and stare at the ceiling. She imagined herself holding books, reading stories, standing in front of a classroom, teaching children how words could change the world. She loved words. Words felt like friends who listened. But dreams were dangerous for girls back then. One day, she gathered courage and said to her mother, "I want to go to school like my brothers." Her mother didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply sighed, a long tired sigh, and said, "That's not for you." That sentence stayed with her for the rest of her life. Not for you. Margaret didn't cry that night. She just turned her face to the wall and learned her first big lesson. Some dreams are not meant to be spoken. From that day on, she helped in the kitchen. She cleaned, cooked, served tea, and smiled politely when guests came. Everyone praised her. What a good girl. So quiet. So obedient. No one asked if she was happy. Years passed quietly. Too quietly. She watched her brothers leave every morning with books under their arms, while she washed dishes that never seemed to end. She memorized recipes instead of poems. She learned patience instead of confidence. And every time she felt sadness, she swallowed it. Because good girls don't complain. At 13, she understood something painful. Her life was already decided. Marriage. Children. Silence. She didn't know yet how heavy regret could become. She only knew that something inside her was slowly disappearing. That little girl with dreams was learning how to disappear politely. Margaret was 19 when she learned the difference between loving someone and choosing someone. Until then, she believed they were the same thing. He lived 2 streets away. Not close enough to be dangerous. Not far enough to be forgotten. His name was Thomas. He wasn't rich. He wasn't powerful. But he was kind. The kind that didn't try to impress, didn't speak loudly, didn't dominate a room. He listened. They met in ordinary places. At the market, near the well, on the road where people passed but never really looked. Their conversations were small, careful, unfinished. "How is your mother? Is your brother home? The weather is changing." But between those simple words lived something deeper. For the first time in her life, Margaret felt seen. Not as a daughter, not as a future wife, not as a responsibility, as a person. Thomas never asked her to be quiet. He never corrected her tone. When she spoke, he waited, and that alone felt like love. At night, Margaret lay awake, heart racing, afraid of her own happiness. She had been taught that joy was temporary, and desire was dangerous. Still, she allowed herself one small rebellion. Hope. She imagined a life where mornings felt lighter, where silence was a choice, not a rule, where she could speak and be heard. But hope, she learned, does not survive long in houses built on tradition. One evening, her mother called her into the room. Margaret knew something was wrong. Her mother didn't sit beside her. She stood. Standing meant decisions had already been made. "We have found a family," her mother said. "A good family." Margaret's heart sank before her mind understood. The man has a job. He is respected. He can provide. Margaret swallowed hard. She asked softly, "Do I have a choice?" Her mother looked away. Choice was not a word used often in their home. "You will understand later," her mother said. "This is how life works." That night, Margaret cried silently into her pillow, not because she was afraid of marriage, but because she was being asked to bury something alive. Love. She never told anyone about Thomas. Not her mother. Not her friends. Some feelings were too fragile to survive exposure. Weeks passed. Preparations began. Clothes were stitched. Relatives visited. Advice was given. Be patient. Be respectful. Be grateful. No one asked how she felt. Margaret saw Thomas one last time at the market. Their eyes met. Nothing was said. There were too many people. Too many rules. Too much fear. But in that one look, everything was understood. Goodbye. She walked away without turning back. That was the moment she later remembered most. Not the wedding. Not the vows. But the walk away. Because that was when she chose silence over truth. The man she married was not cruel. And that made it harder. He was responsible. Hard-working. Quiet. He did his duty. And Margaret did hers. But love cannot be created from obligation. At night, lying beside a stranger who would soon become familiar but never close, Margaret stared at the ceiling and asked herself a question that would return for decades. What would have happened if I had spoken? She never answered it. Instead, she learned something more dangerous than fear. Acceptance. Years passed. Her life settled into routines. Cooking. Cleaning. Serving. Her husband spoke little. She spoke less. They lived side by side, not together. And slowly Margaret stopped expecting more. She told herself stories to survive. This is normal. This is enough. This is life. But sometimes when the house was quiet, she felt a sharp pain in her chest. Not heartbreak. Regret. Because heartbreak heals. Regret waits. And grows. She didn't hate her husband. She didn't blame her parents. She blamed herself. For being obedient when she wanted to be brave. For being quiet when she wanted to speak. For choosing peace over truth. And one day she realized something terrifying. The version of herself who dreamed was gone. She had not died. She had been buried slowly. With permission. Margaret learned very quickly that marriage did not end silence. It only changed its shape. In her new home, everything had a rhythm. Meals were cooked at fixed times. Clothes were washed on fixed days. Expectations were clear, even when they were never spoken aloud. Her husband believed he was doing his duty, and in his own way he was. He brought money home. He paid the bills. He made decisions. But he never asked questions. Not the important ones. How are you? What do you want? Are you happy? Those questions never entered the house. First Margaret tried. She spoke carefully, gently, as if afraid her words might break something fragile. But every time she spoke about her feelings, the conversation ended the same way. Silence. Or advice. Or dismissal. You think too much. This is normal. Life is not a storybook. Slowly, she learned another lesson. Feelings are inconvenient. So she folded them away. Becoming a mother. When her first child was born, something inside Margaret changed. For the first time, someone needed her completely. The baby cried and she responded. The baby smiled and she felt useful. The baby held her finger and she felt seen. Motherhood gave her a purpose when she had lost her identity. She poured everything she had into her children. Love, patience, sacrifice. She stayed awake through sickness. She skipped meals so they could eat more. She ignored her pain so they wouldn't feel fear. People praised her again. She's such a good mother. She never complains. She's so strong. Strength became another cage. Because strong people are not allowed to break. Margaret had more children. With each one, her world grew louder. And her inner voice grew quieter. She stopped thinking about who she was. She became what was needed. A mother. A wife. Caretaker. Nothing more. Years passing quietly. Years passed in a blur of responsibility. School lunches. Laundry. Homework. Doctor visits. Worry. She aged without noticing. One day she saw her reflection and didn't recognize herself. Her face looked tired. Her eyes looked distant. She asked herself quietly, "When did I stop being me?" But there was no time to answer. There was always something to do. Her husband grew older too. He came home tired, sat in silence, ate and slept. They shared a house, a routine, a history, but not intimacy, not emotional closeness, not understanding. Margaret learned to stop expecting connection. Expectations hurt, so she lowered them until nothing was left, being taken for granted. As the children grew, they needed her less. They didn't notice the small sacrifices anymore. They assumed her presence, her cooking, her cleaning, her availability. She became background noise, necessary but invisible. When she spoke, they were distracted. When she was tired, they didn't notice. When she was sad, she smiled anyway. She told herself, "This is what mothers do." But late at night, when everyone slept, she felt something dangerous rising. Bitterness. Not toward her children, toward herself, for disappearing so completely that even she could not find herself anymore. The moment she realized the loss, there was one moment she remembered clearly, a small moment. She was standing in the kitchen, stirring soup, when she heard laughter in the living room. Her family was laughing together. She wasn't part of the conversation. She wasn't invited, not intentionally excluded, just forgotten. She stood there, holding the spoon, and felt a deep ache in her chest. Not loneliness, erasure. She realized something terrifying. If she disappeared tomorrow, the routine would continue. The soup would still be cooked. The house would still function. But she would not be missed as a person, only as a role. That night she cried silently, not because her family was cruel, but because she had trained them to live without her voice. Growing older, growing quieter. As she aged, her body slowed down. Her hands shook sometimes. Her back ached. Her energy faded. But no one noticed. She didn't complain. Complaining felt selfish. She watched her children build lives of their own. She was proud and deeply sad because they were living lives she never dared to choose. Freedom looked good on them. It looked impossible on her. She told herself, "At least they will not live with regret." But regret doesn't disappear that easily. It waits, patiently. The first time she spoke and was ignored. Once she tried again. At a family gathering, she laughed softly and said, "I always wanted to be a teacher." The room didn't go quiet. It didn't stop. Someone changed the subject. Someone checked their phone. Someone didn't hear her. And that was worse than rejection. That was proof. Her story no longer mattered. She never tried again. Ending of part 3. Slow, heavy. Margaret would later say, "I didn't lose myself suddenly. I gave myself away slowly, until nothing was left to give." She didn't hate her life. That made the regret harder to explain, because it wasn't about pain. It was about unused potential, unspoken truth, unlived life. And regret does not shout. It whispers. Every night. Old age did not arrive suddenly for Margaret. It came quietly. One day she realized she was tired more often. Another day, she noticed her hands shaking when she poured tea. Then one morning she stood up too quickly and the world spun. No one warned her that old age would feel like slowly fading from the edges of life. Her children were grown now. They had families, jobs, responsibilities. They loved her. But love, she learned, changes shape with time. Visits became shorter. Calls became less frequent. Conversations became practical. Are you eating properly? Do you need medicine? Is everything okay? Everything, except her heart. Margaret moved slower now. The house felt bigger. The silence felt heavier. She sat near the window every evening, not because she expected someone, but because watching the outside world reminded her that life was still happening, just not with her. Loneliness without abandonment. She was not abandoned. That was the painful part. Her children checked on her. They helped when needed. They cared. But they did not see her. Loneliness does not always come from being alone. Sometimes it comes from being surrounded. And still unheard. She stopped sharing small things. No one noticed. She stopped asking for help. People praised her independence. She's strong. She doesn't need much. Margaret smiled, because correcting them felt pointless. The nights that never ended. Nights were the hardest. Her body was tired, but her mind was awake. Memories visited without permission. The little girl who wanted to read. The young woman who loved quietly. The mother who gave everything. They all sat beside her bed, asking questions. What if? Why not? Was it worth it? Regret did not come as panic. It came as calm sadness. The kind that settles deep and refuses to leave. She realized something terrifying. Her biggest regret was not suffering. It was not choosing herself even once. The day she couldn't ignore it anymore. One afternoon, her granddaughter came to visit. She was young, confident, unapologetic. She spoke about her dreams without fear. I don't want to live a life I didn't choose, the girl said. Margaret felt something break inside her. Not pain, recognition. That sentence echoed louder than any argument she had ever avoided. Her granddaughter looked at her and asked gently, "Grandma, are you happy?" The room went quiet. Margaret opened her mouth to give the usual answer. "I'm fine. I'm grateful. I'm okay." But the words didn't come. Instead, tears fell. Slowly, silently. For the first time in decades, she did not stop them. The confession. "I lived a good life," Margaret said softly. Her voice shook. "But I did not live my life." Her granddaughter listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't fix. She didn't rush. She waited. And that waiting gave Margaret permission. "I was obedient," Margaret continued. "I was responsible. I was strong." She paused. "I was never brave." She spoke about the school she never attended, the love she never chose, the voice she never used. She spoke about silence, how it protected others, and destroyed her slowly. "I thought sacrifice would bring peace," she said. "But it only brought quiet regret." Her granddaughter held her hand. Margaret felt something she hadn't felt in years. Relief. The truth about regret. That night Margaret slept deeply. For the first time in a long time. Because truth, even when painful, is lighter than silence. In the following days she spoke more. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But honestly. She told her children small truths. "I needed you to listen. I felt invisible sometimes. I wish I had spoken sooner." Some were uncomfortable. Some were quiet. But she didn't take it back. Because at 82 she finally understood. Regret does not disappear when you ignore it. It disappears when you name it. Her final message. Margaret knew her time was limited. She didn't fear death. She feared unfinished truth. So she said what she needed to say. To anyone who would listen. "If you are quiet to keep peace," she said, "ask yourself whose peace you are protecting. Don't wait to be old to be honest. Don't mistake silence for strength. Don't live only to be needed." She smiled gently and added, "Live to be real." The last evening. On her last evening, Margaret sat by the window again. The sun went down slowly. She felt tired, but peaceful. She had no more secrets. No more buried dreams. Only acceptance. She whispered, "I should have spoken earlier." Then she smiled. Because even late truth is still truth. Final closing, very slow delivery. Margaret lived 82 years. Not all of them were happy. Not all of them were fair. But at the end she gave the world one gift. A warning. And a lesson.